This is CFWE, Alberta's best country. Good afternoon and welcome to the Alberta Indigenous COVID-19 Vaccine Town Hall presented by the Wsth Radio Network, CFWE and CJWE. Today we have special guests, Cold Lake First Nation Chief Roger Martin, Dr. Lana Potts, Shaylee Peacock, and Dr. James Makokis. Now over to your host for the Town Hall, Loa Beebe.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Wsth Radio. And I'd like to welcome all of our listeners on the Wsth Radio Network and those of us that are joining us online. If you have any questions today, please send us a message on the CFWE Facebook live stream. We have messaging there and we have somebody watching that. And today I'd like to thank everyone for joining us regarding the COVID-19 vaccine situation in the First Nation communities in Alberta. I'll be your host for the next hour and a half as we have an opportunity to learn more about the COVID-19 vaccine situation and have our panelists answer your COVID-19 vaccine questions. With us today, I'm honored to have Chief Roger Martin from the Cold Lake First Nation, Dr. Lana Potts from the Piikani Nation, and Dr. James Makokis from the Saddle Lake Cree Nation. And we also have a youth panelist, Shaylee Peacock from the Enoch Cree Nation. They're all here to answer your questions and have a discussion about the current COVID-19 vaccine situation. Before we start, I would like to begin by acknowledging that I'm joining today's discussion from the city of Calgary, which is the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, which includes the Siksika, Piikani, and Kainai First Nations, the Stoney Nakoda Nation, comprising of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley First Nations, and the Tsuut'ina Nation. Today, this territory is also home to the Métis Nation. While we meet on a virtual platform from coast to coast, we acknowledge the ancestral and unceded territory of all the Inuit, Métis, and First Nations people that call this land home. Today, I would also like to thank our Wsth media staff, the First Nations Inuit and Health Branch, and the steering committee that we have that are hosting these town halls from Treaty 6, 7, and 8. I would like to invite at this time our panelists. We're just going to do some introductions. And at this time, I would like to invite Chief Roger Martin from Cold Lake First Nation. Welcome.
Hi, thank you for having me. Say welcome to everybody who's listening. Hoping to get some good dialogue today and see what comes out of it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chief. At this time, I will go to Dr. Lana Potts to do an introduction.
Okay, Tansei. Welcome everyone and thank you for having me today. My name is Lana Potts. I'm from the Piikani Nation. My traditional name is Wsth, and I'm a family doctor and I work in the Siksika Nation, the Piikani Nation, and work with Alberta Health Services on the virtual care clinic. So you may have heard me on the phone. And I'm really excited to be here to talk about health and to talk about continuing to protect our people. I work primarily in primary care, but do a lot of community advocacy and international advocacy on improving health for First Nations. I have been a vaccine champion and a vaccine advocate from the beginning, and I have a lot of history as to why I toe that line. So I look forward to having this discussion and having good dialogue and also bringing good information. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. At this time, I will go to Dr. James Makokis from Saddle Lake.
Sure, tansin itu temte kehoka papemote te guamistigwaskik na basis nuihun onyx koponicochinia eotiscan kinokamase ke amisquichi waskaigan. Hi everybody, I'm Dr. James Makokis. I'm a family physician originally from the Saddle Lake Cree Nation in Treaty 6. I work in Kihiwin Cree Nation, also in Treaty 6 in Edmonton. I'm also the medical director at Shkabe Makwa at the Center for Addiction and Mental Health in Toronto. Really happy to be here with you all today and with these amazing people on the panel, and excited to talk about accurate information about the vaccines and all the things that that are important for us as Indigenous people.
Thank you very much. And I'm very honored today to have a youth panelist to talk from a youth perspective, and Shaylee Peacock.
Namaste, everybody. My name is Shaylee Peacock. I'm from Enoch Cree Nation. I am one of the youth counselors for the Enoch Youth Advisory Committee. I also hold a couple different other positions with the U of A and within the community. However, that is one that's closest to my heart. I also work as a research assistant at the U of A. Thank you.
Nice, thank you very much. I do want to just go back to, so we'll do a little bit of history. I think more than ever, especially with the current fifth wave that we're in, I would like to do a little bit of background and history on the COVID-19 vaccine situation. I know last year when we began this, our First Nations were the first ones to get access to the vaccine, and we're very thankful for that. And it's been over a year later. So what I'd like to do is ask each panelist, and I'll go to Chief Martin first, and if you can talk about in your communities, if you've had vaccine clinics and how has the turnout been?
Hi, yes, we've been since this outbreak of this pandemic, we've been diligent with our staff, and our health staff been doing their job tremendously, really good. I gotta give them compliments on their to be on top of it right from the get-go. You know, our vaccinations rates are really good. We're about 70% vaccinated. You know, we awareness all the time. You know, I used my personal story to get a lot of the people that were on the fence, that weren't too sure about the vaccination, when they found out it could happen to anybody, and like, you know, it happened to me. So after that, a lot of people, that was kind of an eye opener for the community. So a lot of them went out and got vaccinated. So, you know, it's unfortunate it happened to me, but the same thing, you can't look at it as a negative, as kind of a blessing. So people went out there, the awareness, you know, it turned around. Our vaccinations rates went up. Our staff has been awesome doing it. We were on top of all the vaccinations. We got make sure our elders got their booster shots. You know, we're open to. We also have extra. We had an extra vaccines, so we had an open kind of like a drive-through clinic at the casino in the fall. So we also helped out the community in large in the surrounding area. So not just Cold Lake First Nations, but whoever had access to a vaccine or wanted, we offered that service to them. So we did our part. We're still doing our part, and you know, awareness to keep the people safe, and that's why I sit here, I guess. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, Chief. I do want to say that when we began these vaccine town halls, it was something different for leadership to have to go into emergency mode and be there in a different way for their communities. And it's been almost a daily, you know, everybody's on deck there. And so I want to say thank you for your leadership, and thank you for providing the leadership that you did in your community and you continue to do. And thank you for joining us again today.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. I will go to Dr. Lana Potts. In a similar question, I do know you're in the medical field. You work in a few places as a doctor. And can you also even but how available are the vaccine clinics, and has there been a good turnout in your area?
Yeah, so I want to start back just a little bit as to why I have a passion around vaccines. So I was born, you know, in the 1970s, and from the stories when I was raised, my grandmother shared with me how she lost her mother at a very young age to a novel disease. She's been open around that her mother died of tuberculosis. And I was always wondering, how does tuberculosis affect our community? And over the years have learned that pandemics are not new to First Nations communities. They have been affecting us for hundreds of years. And often we see communities completely wiped out in the past. If not wiped out, our population decreased to very small numbers. We've often seen a very low response from the health bodies to respond, to provide healthcare, to provide what we need in our communities. And so I grew up knowing this, and I grew up really recognizing I wanted to work in the health field. And when the pandemic was first declared 2 years ago, actually on January 30th by the World Health Organization, I had a real fear of what it was going to do to our communities, because knowing our history, know that I do have a little interest in medical historical knowledge, and recognizing we needed to do something, recognizing that we always found a way to protect our people through our medicines, through our ceremonies, through our communication with each other. And looking that for the first while, almost for the first 12 months, there was no real protection for us in the event of a vaccine, in the event of a protection. And we started to see high rates of COVID occurring in different pockets across the country. But realizing that COVID brought out the fact that we don't have the healthcare we need in our community, the fact that we have the highest comorbidity rates around cancer, around respiratory disease, around in terms of diabetes and cardiovascular disease, and yet we needed something to respond. And in discussions with physicians and discussions at different levels, I was scared. I was personally scared. I had my own COVID experience in very early part of the pandemic. When I came back from California, I traveled and I was sick for 2 months. I actually was not sure how I was going to recover, and I was hospitalized. I was hospitalized with a very low blood count. And it really made me think, I need to do more. I need to do more in my role, and I need to do more in my voice. I need to be able to say that it's not easy going through this. It's not a cold, it's not a flu, it's not something that people just get over. And it's a very Russian roulette that has happened with individuals. So you're going to get the varying where one person is fine and the other person ends up in the ICU and the other person may die. And so when vaccinations came up, and knowing how vaccinations have been developed over years, that it wasn't something that was done in 30 days, there's lots of myths around that I really pushed for the vaccine because I did the research, because I talked to elders, because I talked to my colleagues who I trust. And when it was announced in the fall of 2020 that we were going to get a vaccine, I was at a table to really start to push this, to be able to say, we were originally taken off that vaccine list to be first. And so we decided as physicians, as frontline people, that no, we can't. We have to be first because of how pandemics affect our community. So from day one, I was calling, I was pushing, and I can proudly say I've been double vaxxed for a year. It's interesting, 2 doses I've had as of today. Today is my 1-year anniversary for being double vaxxed. And I really started to do everything that I can to ensure that there was access. There was access at a local level, at a provincial level, but even at a national level, to ensure that we were at a level playing field, that we weren't getting the third-rate medicine we often get as First Nations people. And we've had good success because of that. We've had good success in engaging in community, of being frontline, of being there. I give injections, I have dialogue, I give good information, I answer those hard questions. And I think that's been a very good success in the communities that I work in particular in Piikani. I always say Piikani Nation has led a very good vaccine campaign because it's very community driven, such as most communities are. I was told this morning we are over 90%, vaccinated, and that's something we need to celebrate, because it's a trust to take that vaccine. It's to recognize where the history of vaccines and how they've affected us and how medicine has affected us. And through that, I've given a lot of effort into realizing other communities may not have a community champion. Not all communities have physicians, not all communities have nurses. And so just, being open and even creating a campaign, which I'll talk about a little later around VaxFest, of going into community and really recognizing what, through collaboration of my colleague, Dr. Makokis, and other people, of how do we get this out there, but how do we do it in a good way? And so we see, I don't call it hesitancy. I actually call it, it's almost a miseducation, because not everybody has access to good education. Not everybody has access to good information. Often what they have is the internet. Often what they have are myths on TikTok and other social media. So I don't judge people who have different beliefs than I do or different understanding. I just like to share information. And through that, we've been able to get success. So I learned that working with First Nations communities and working with my people and going home is we need to be very truthful about this. And that's where we see success. And we need to recognize people come at getting a vaccine cautiously. They come at, they're unsure, but, when we lend a warm hand and an honest heart, I found that's how we've been able to achieve that 90% plus. And we're continuing to do this in the communities, getting out every time we can. So I do support it, and I think they're ongoing. I do see a trend where they're kind of tapering off, and there's different reasons to that. So I'll leave it there, and I'd like to be interested to hear from my other colleagues.
For sure. Thank you very much, Lana. I want to say, just for our listeners and those that are interested, we are from the same community. And I want to say I've always been proud of you. I've always been proud. And that's the other thing that First Nations and Indigenous doctors also take on. There's a community responsibility, not only from a doctor, but also a community. And you actually, it's very heightened. You know, there's, and you even said there was more that I wanted to do. And the reason why I say that is because my son went to get his vaccine and he was in shock. You were giving him a vaccine. He did not know you were a doctor. And when he came back, he's like, you never told me she was a doctor. So thank you, and thank you for being there. Because you didn't, what I thought about, and I even told him, you did not need to be giving vaccines. That was not something that a doctor needed to do. So thank you, and thank you for your work up to this point and continued work. I want to go now to Dr. James Makokis, and I will just start again with the question, and please feel free to add to this. And how are vaccine clinics and the availability in your community, and has there been a good turnout thus far?
Yeah, so we actually launched when the vaccines were available, we launched it in ceremony. So we knew that many of our people would be very mistrustful of the government for things that have happened to our people in the past, you know, experimentation on children in residential schools, or the forced sterilization of Indigenous women, or you know, nutritional experiments, or any number of things that have happened to our people as an act of genocide, that our people rightfully mistrust the government. And one of the things that we knew we'd have to do is to be involved. So, you know, right from the beginning, there was a group of Indigenous physicians that were from across the country that volunteered their time every week to help inform the federal government and to provide relevant on-the-ground health information that didn't have to be sifted up through the bureaucracy, that we can actually directly tell the people involved in running the health systems on the reserve at a national stage what our health needs are in real time. Because we knew in the past what had happened to our people with the H1N1 pandemic, when, you know, communities in Manitoba asked for help and instead they were sent body bags. And we said, never again will we allow our people to be treated in that way. And so it was really important for us to get involved from the beginning, and also to involve our culture, ceremonies, language, elders, and traditional people. So in Kihiwin Cree Nation, we extended an invitation to the matriarchs, so the oldest female elders in the community, because in Cree culture, we're a matriarchal people. And the women, it is their responsibility, it's their role, it's their right to be able to help ensure the health and safety of future generations. And so we asked those oldest cookums to come in and bless and pray with the medicines and the vaccine as we had it available, but also to role model how important it is for not only them to get the vaccine, but to role model to others in the community that they're getting it and they're saying that it's safe to get the vaccine as well. They want to get it to ensure that in 7 generations that we still have strong Indigenous people here. And so, you know, they prayed, they had a ceremony, and we also did an honor song. So we invited one of our young families to come and sing because it was a celebration. At that point, we had been in the pandemic for over a year. And now for the first time, we had a sign of hope. We could, you know, start to look after protecting one another and actually have a way to ensure that what happened to our people in the past in the smallpox epidemics or the TB epidemics or any number of those infectious diseases that eradicated our people down to about 10% of what we originally were on Turtle Island did not have to happen. And so those are some of the things that we did in the Kihiwin Cree Nation. As Dr. Potts mentioned, we were very instrumental in starting VaxFest, which hopefully we can talk about later, to help engage our young people using Indigenous social media influencers to invite people to come in. But I would say, you know, in Kihiwin, at Kihiwin Health Services, that we're open every day of the week. So, even on the weekends, on Saturday and Sunday, if people need to get tested, if they feel, that they have symptoms of COVID, that they have the opportunity to do that, which is amazing to, an amazing thing for 2 years that our health workers have gone every single day to ensure the safety of every single member in our community. And that demonstrates how much they care for people, how much they love people, and how much they want to ensure that as least amount of people get sick as possible. And at the same time, we have the vaccines available for them to be immunized as well. So, I think a lot of the communities have done an amazing job. And really the part of the conversation that needs to be discussed is, how can we ensure that those that still haven't got vaccinated, what can we do to help shift them to, maybe change their mind, to say, hey, I've seen a lot of people get sick. I've seen people die unnecessarily. That doesn't need to happen. And, there is this option available to us that is endorsed and supported by Indigenous physicians, Indigenous nurses, health professionals, who have had it for, at this point, Dr. Potts has had hers for a year, and that it's safe to take these medicines, that our elders actually enshrine that into our Treaty 6 specifically, that in the future, if we needed medicines for diseases that we didn't have medicines yet, that we'd have access to them. And so I think that's also a really important message, is that generations ago, our elders thought about us today, that we would have ways to protect ourselves.
For sure, thank you. I do also want to say the same thing, in the sense of thank you so much for all of your work thus far. I do know it's been tireless for everyone in our communities, but especially those health professionals that are on the front line. And, Lana posted a photo the other day, and she said, I'm risking my life, and she had all of her PPE on, and that's a reality. And when you have people that far and lives have been lost, and there's been all types of effects, it is time for our people to get educated on the facts and understand what those are. So I do want to take some time again to say thank you, and thank you for all the hard work that you're doing and you continue to do. I think any role that an Indigenous person takes on, it's a lot more than just the role that they're taking on. So thank you very much. At this time, I will go to our youth panelist, and she's brave. She's an advocate. She comes from the Peacock family in Enoch Cree Nation, and I'll ask about the access to the vaccines as well, and those types of things. But Pauline definitely put your name forward. She was very proud of the advocacy that you've done. So at this time, I'd like to ask you to say a few words.
Yeah, well, where to start? Well, for me, where my advocacy comes from is actually, it's sourced from my brother. He has very severe nonverbal autism. And when the pandemic hit, my family was, terrified of the realities that Indigenous people face when, they do have to be hospitalized. And when you're not verbal, how do you express the things that you experience while getting care? So for us, we were very scared that in the event that my brother ever did get sick, he, might have never made it. Considering that, a lot of my family, sorry, I apologize. I have an annoying little cat in the background. But in the event that, he didn't make it, we were kind of just stuck and scared at, in the very beginning of the pandemic. And, later on when the vaccine was announced, my entire immediate family who sees my brother on a daily basis all got vaccinated, just as an added protection for, my multi-generational family, my grandparents, my dad, my nieces and nephews, all of these different walks of life that, you know, are inevitably affected by the pandemic. Recently, we just got over a huge bout of COVID. It cycled through my entire family for the most part. And, you know, I got COVID prior to the vaccine, and the differences between the two is just astronomical. Prior to the vaccine, it took me about 10 days to make a full recovery, and this time around it only took me about 6. So quite a difference there. But, you know, I think on top of, you know, the benefits of the vaccine and the effectiveness of it, I feel that, you know, it's not just our responsibility to get vaccinated just for our own health, but also for the health of others around us. And that's partly where, you know, I feel so strongly about vaccines comes from, because, you know, at the end of the day, I want to protect my brother and others like him.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. I do want to add to that, you know, my son, he is going to be 20 soon. And right away, I didn't think that he would have a different choice when we talked about the vaccine. And immediately he was like, I'm not getting it. And I said, oh, we do need to get, I was in shock, but I stayed calm. And I said, because he was over 18 and I couldn't necessarily tell him what to do. And I said, we are going to be going to visit, you know, your grandparents on reserve, and we are going to be visiting your great aunts and uncles on reserve, and we're going to be doing it for them and the protection of them. And 2 seconds later, he's like, oh yeah, okay. You know, so I do like that, you know, as a youth, you're thinking of your family, you're thinking specifically of your brother, and you're thinking of people in the community. That was a lot of the messaging that was coming on. But I do want to go to Chief Roger Martin. And, you know, we're coming into 1 year of the vaccine getting out to our communities. And there is still hesitancy. That's why we're here. There is still a few communities that are out there that have the numbers are low, you know, and they're not as high as 90% or even as high as your community. Can you tell me about what you're hearing about vaccine hesitancy right now? And what is it that's actually helping people overcome that hesitancy?
You know, for us, like for me personally at Cold Lake, we've been addressing the issue, trying to hammer it back to the community, and just to anybody who would listen. Like for me, I tell them my story and how it could happen to anybody. It doesn't discriminate who it picks up. It just when you get it, you hit it. With that Delta variant, the one that was going on, that was I figure it was the more severe one, but I guess they're all bad. But with this new Omicron, it's highly contagious, and the chances of ending up in the hospital are kind of not as guaranteed, but you know, they recommend that you stay home. If you feel sick, stay home, you know, self-isolate and stuff like that. That's the message that we've been sending. You know, we tell people, go out there 100%, get your vaccinations. I've been stressing a lot we have a different age demographic that seems like they don't want to get it. That's the ones that we've been really trying to focus on right now. But for the most part, like I just tell everybody, stay safe. You know, I tell people on a personal level, like my situation, what happened to me, and if I could prevent that from happening to me or anybody across Canada, that'll be. I know if I could save one person's life, you know, I'm doing good. You know, it was pretty intense, I guess you could say, for me.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but I do want to hear this story. So not everyone knows that, one, that you got COVID, two, that you were in the hospital. Can you go back to the beginning of it and what were the circumstances and just your whole experience, if you could share, because you have a personal story there.
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, there's about September 6th on a long weekend. Prior to that, it was in August. And we're heading into it was a long weekend, as I recall. We're heading into the long weekend, and me and my brother sat down and we talked about this COVID and the Delta and all the chances of getting sick and all that. We talked about that, and so we decided after a long weekend we were going to go get our shots. Lo and behold, I get sick. I got sick before when it first came out. You know, I was severely sick. I took my antibiotics. I did my diligence. I stayed home. I did whatever. I got my test. When I got sick, I felt myself really like something was wrong with me. So my lungs were really being like hard to breathe. I was being choked out, kind of like just was fighting fire all the time. So I got tested. I did test positive for COVID. So right away I went to my doctor. He gave me some antibiotics. I was sitting at home waiting, and I was hoping to get better, but it just continuously gradually got worse. Then I called the ambulance on myself on a Saturday. They came pick me up. They took me in. No, excuse me. It was a Monday. They came pick me up. It was a holiday. They came pick me up. My funny thing, my buddy was driving an ambulance. His name's Jeff. He's a paramedic. He come pick me up, and you know, I went to the hospital. As soon as I got to the hospital, they incubated me immediately. My blood oxygen levels were very low. They had I stayed one more night, I probably would have passed away. That's how bad I was. I woke up 2 weeks later, and you know, after my coma, I woke up from my coma 2 weeks later. They asked me how long you've been in the hospital. I said, I don't know, maybe 1 or 2 days. It took 2 weeks. I was like, okay. So, and it's been on a recovery ever since. Prior to that, I was a pretty healthy guy. Like I said, COVID, it doesn't care who you are. I was a pretty healthy guy. I lifted weights for 25 years. I was about 255, 260 pounds. I went to the hospital. I came out, I was about 200 pounds, lost all that weight. So now it's just like the recovery stage was really good. I have to say the staff at the hospital, the treatment of the people that took care of me were awesome. You know, I got nothing bad to say about them. It was great, and relatively, I was a candidate for one of those monoclonal antibodies. I was a candidate for one of them. So I think that really played a big part on my recovery. It was very limited at the time of what was offered in Canada for that mono antibody. I took it. My progress was, like I tell people, I went to sleep, I woke up. But for my caretakers, like my girlfriend, my brother, my family, and the rest of the community that were keeping tabs on it, it was like highs and lows, peaks and valleys. So when it got to the point where it got really bad, they were thinking long term, put a trichotomy and all that. They were thinking about that. Lo and behold, I just shot back up, and amazingly, I woke up on a Saturday. By Wednesday, not even 5 days later, I walked out of the hospital with my own power. So I've been at home. When I got home, I started healing. The main thing was, I know if I got back to the community and my family, my friends, my community, and everybody who was generally concerned, I could rest. They could rest assured knowing that I was home, that I was okay, and then I could start healing. So it's been about since September. I've been out and about. I've been doing a lot of activity. I got the clear head to start lifting weights again. So that's good. I've been healthy about that way. I have no lingering side effects from what happened. I got clean bill of health. My lungs are good. I take a lot of precautionary measures now. And like I said, I advocate for a vaccine and the safetiness of the community, because I experienced it firsthand. I know what it's like. And, you know, unfortunately, some of us that got it didn't make it. You know, my best friend, Randy, and I got it at the same time, and he was awake through the whole deal. So we're both in the same time. We both went in the same hospital. I was in a couple of days earlier, and then he came in later. But he was awake. He was at the U of A, and I was at the Grey Nuns Hospital. And that's where I was incubated, and, you know, when I woke up and all that. So we kept in contact. But his paralysis, because he was up all the time, he had a lot of anxiety and just breathing. Whereas I just was just kind of getting back into the swing of things, just recovering. It took a long toll out of me, but I never gave up. I just had faith in the community, faith in prayer, and faith in the people. And I'm here today, and I share my story. And like I said, prior to that, I talked to a lot of guys that know me in town, Indigenous, non-Indigenous, and they were on the fence about vaccine. And they're like, Roger, we saw you one week, and next week we hear about that. A lot of them went out and got their shots. They got vaccinated, so that actually helped. A lot of them that were on the fence saw my story, heard about me, know me, and like I said, I was a pretty healthy guy, never had no health problems. They said, oh man, if that could happen to that guy, let's go get fixed up. So that's what they've been doing. And as for now, with our health center and our staff, we're still promoting that the shots, to come in and get your shots. We're pretty well, everybody who's pretty well mandated. We're at, our numbers of vaccines are pretty high, but we still, like I said, there's still that little demographic that are still sitting on the fence, and we tell them, could happen to anybody, happen to me. We just keep pushing the issue of trying to get them to get their shots.
I do. Thank you so much. And I want to say, I'm thankful you were here today, because it is a real reality. And
Oh, yeah.
Your story is definitely, you wonder to yourself, wow, I actually made it through that. So thank you for sharing, and thank you for wanting to come on to share that important message. But in your story, I heard, this was the second time you got the COVID?
Yeah, when it first came a couple of years ago, when it first came out, I had got sick, like severely sick, and that was the first time in my life that my lungs actually physically hurt. Like I was totally just choked right out. I went to the doctor. It wasn't yet identified as COVID yet. Later on, about 6 months to a year later, the symptoms that they prescribed to me, they said, yes, that was, you kind of got that first variant that came out. But I figured I had like an immune to it, kind of, but it was just, this new Delta was just way too strong. And, I did what I did the first time. I got better. I just took my time, self-isolated, just kept it on in the quiet, like self-isolated at home, and try to stay away the best I can. But like I said, when this Delta variant came along, it was just like it happened so fast, and it just boom, instantly. I was just knocked down. It was like crazy.
Yeah, and one of the reasons why I say that is I heard a story last week in the news of this lady who did not want to get a vaccine, and her husband got COVID and her son got COVID. And she was believing, and she's passed from COVID, and she was believing that if she got it, it gave her immunity, and so she wouldn't get it. And so she was believing that. So I'm really glad to hear some of the facts of your story, and to understand, and even to hear, from our two doctors today, you don't know who's going to get it, and you don't know how it's going to affect anyone.
I know, like I said, I was never anti-vax. I was always for the vaccine. I was always for the safety of the people and all that. That's why I sit here as chief. Another thing is, when I got sick, I didn't know when I first got sick, nobody knew what it was. So now that they identified it, I didn't think I was immune to it. I didn't think anything of it. I just said, yes, it's there. You got to get your shots. So like I said, at the beginning of our conversation, me and my brother did decide to get our shot. It's unfortunate that it happened. I did get the vaccine. When I came out of the hospital, I wasn't eligible for my shot till December 8th because of that monoclonal, whatever they gave me. Yeah. So I'm good now. I'm all vaccinated. I'm all good. I support it. I'm 100% for it. People have a right to choose, but I hope they choose right. There's a lot of those people that are on the fence that say our rights and freedoms. Look what's going on in Canada today. Look at with the protests and all that. It's just one of those things. Like I tell people, you get vaccinated all the time. We get vaccinated as kids. It's just another thing to help us get by. I'd rather be vaccinated than have that much of a chance, because after going what I went through, man, some of those guys should really take a step back, and it's for the
Yeah.
safety. Yes.
Well, and I'm thankful to hear your story has helped people go get vaccinated. And today I know people will hear this as well. And they're actually hearing it from, because the regular media doesn't necessarily cover cover the effects that happen in our communities. So thank you. Thank you very much for that. I will go to Dr. Makokis, and again, I'm going to go back to the question, and please answer how you would like. There is still vaccine hesitancy that's out there. And can you talk about what is making people overcome the hesitancy, and why are people still hesitant?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to understand the context of vaccine mistrust. And I don't want to say hesitancy, I want to say mistrust, which is well founded in government genocidal policies, which I'll say over and over again. So it's really a traumatic response that people are having for self-preservation. Because in the past, when we've worked to trust the government in ensuring the well-being of our children, people, and communities, that it's been very devastating for us. So that's challenging in this context of a global pandemic, when in our communities, we don't have healthcare. We have very limited healthcare. I would say about 7 or 8 out of the First Nations in Alberta have primary care, so family physicians and nurse practitioners that are there on a regular basis, Monday to Friday. And so now when we need people to be uptaking a life-saving intervention, a nation-saving intervention, there is a lot of mistrust that we need to work to rebuild. One, because there's no pre-existing relationships with healthcare providers like Dr. Potts or like myself that have worked in the community and know the people and patients and how we can talk with them and interact them, and that they can trust us, because our people have an inherent mistrust of the healthcare system because of the racism that they experience when they go there. And the second thing that works against us is the centuries of mistrust that we have with the government. So for these reasons, it's important for us to look at that and say, why are our people not doing that? And again, it is when we think of people that are looking to protect themselves, they're going to fight, they're going to run away, they're going to freeze, or they're going to flee. Those are all traumatic responses. And how do we get around that? It's by having good personal relationships, by having people that we trust. It's by having people that look like us. So this is really important to have Indigenous, Brown doctors and nurses and pharmacists and healthcare workers that our people know that they can go to, and that they won't be misinformed or led astray or lied to. That we offer our treatments with love, kindness, caring, compassion, and humor, and that we don't shame people for the decisions that they're making, but really have an understanding of where they're coming from. At the same time, we have to go back and understand our principles and laws that we have as Indigenous people. And as Cree people, we'd say nagatemsuk, that we have to protect one another. Mamohkamatuk, that we have to work together to ensure that we will get through this with as many people as possible. And because of that severe mistrust in the government, that our people want to use our own ways and medicines, which is so important. We used our ways and medicines to get through pandemics in the past. Our elders and knowledge holders know what those medicines are. But we have to realize that this virus is extremely different, and that when we think again of that medicine chest clause in our treaty that they left for us in the future for pandemics, that we have the ability to use these new medicines, which in this case is, whether that's Moderna, whether that's Pfizer, whatever vaccine you're going to get, that our elders thought about us so we'd have a way out of it. So it's recontextualizing that to say, hey, this is something that we've always done. We've always looked out for one another. We've always loved one another, took care of one another. Our elders thought about us, hundreds of years ago, so that if we were in this situation today, that we can help ourselves and get out of it, and really shifting the conversation to that rather than polarizing it and saying, you can only use, Cree medicines. You can only use Cree ceremonies. You can't use Western medicine, when we know in fact that we can use both medicines well. And the unfortunate thing is, because our people are going into that trauma response and, largely fleeing and running away from using this medicine that's available to us, we see many of our elders passing away. We've seen many of our ceremonial holders pass away. We've seen many of our spiritual leaders pass away. And it's very scary as a younger person. My generation in my community in Saddle Lake is the first generation of non-fluent Nehiyawewan speakers, of our language speakers. And that puts an immense and a tremendous amount of pressure on us to not only ensure the preservation of our language, but also try to work as hard as we can, as quickly as we can, with the limited amount of elders that we have left, to ensure that we learn the medicines and that we learn our titigiao and our ceremonies, that we learn all of those things that we have to, so that when we have children and they have children, they still know as much as possible to be the strongest Nehiyaw person or Nitsitapi person or Dakota person as possible. And that's what we need to think about. How are we going to ensure that as many of us are around as possible, so that we can maintain these ways? And I think that is the key message here.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I really like all of the aspects that you're pulling in your answer there, historically, before pre-contact, and currently, and those things that we're trying to take forward to the next generations and maintain. I want to thank you for that. At this time, before we go to Dr. Potts for the same question, I want to again thank WindSpeaker Media, First Nations Inuit Health Branch, and our steering committee from Treaty 6, 7, and 8 who made today possible. I also want to remind people you can ask a question of our panelists by messaging CFWE on Facebook, and we will be going there if we do have a question. So I want to thank everyone again, and I would also like to thank all of our panelists today, taking some time out of their busy lives. I know I have some of the most busiest people in the country with us today, so thank you very much for joining us. I will go to Dr. Lana Potts, and again, the question is, there's still vaccine hesitancy after a year into vaccines being available. What is it that people are doing to overcome, and what is the hesitancy?
Thank you. So I want to just quote one of my teachers who I've met and have established relationship with, and her name is Dr. Wsth Horn. And she said in one of our meetings, we are storytellers, and we tell story, and we are story of people, and our stories are powerful. And what we hear from one person to the next is what changes us, because that's actually what preserved and kept our communities alive, is our stories. And our stories is where our culture comes from and our prayer comes from. And I think about that because what we hear are stories. And we are still in a lifetime where we were tested on. We were tested on with medicines in the past. We look at the BCG vaccine, the tuberculosis vaccine in southern Saskatchewan, the experiments that occurred within residential school, within Indian hospitals, with the forced sterilization of Indigenous women that still does occur within this country. And so people don't feel cared about. And why do we then tell them to trust a system that's never actually cared for them? I really believe in a philosophy that when you care about people, they care about themselves. And in caring about themselves, they care about their community. And I think that's where I come from with this perspective of vaccine, whether it's hesitancy or misinformation. It's just really caring for people and meeting people where they're at, and meeting people to recognize, like I stated in my opening statement, not everybody has good information. And good information may come from elders, may come from media, may come from science, it may come from peers. And sometimes their only information comes from those that are around them. there's been some data that's come forth, and I want to speak to what Dr. Makoka said around trauma. And the British Medical Journal published recently that trauma is actually associated with vaccine hesitancy. This is something I think we've spoken about for years within our circles around trauma and how trauma affects us and how trauma affects the brain. And the flee response is the first response in trauma. And when people don't know, the easiest thing to do is to not show up. And if we create safe spaces around asking questions, around being present, and you mentioned earlier, Loa, about being present. I didn't have to give vaccinations. Technically, I'm told by certain tables, that's what nurses do. That's not what doctors do. And I recognize, no, I need to be there. I need to be there. I need to, empty the garbage, give a vaccine. I need to recognize that I'm invested in people doing this because I want to invest in our future. And I think the whole idea around this, it's people who are just unsure. There's different schools of it. People who've never had experience with healthcare. They've been healthy, and I was talking about males. There's a lot of males that we see a more, hesitancy in taking the vaccine or misinformation because a lot of young men are very healthy. We talked about being a weightlifter, Chief. You talked about feeling well. They feel that sense of invincibility. And so when you don't have a healthcare experience, you may not realize that you can have a healthcare experience and that we're not doing this and promoting this because we want to cause harm, but we want to cause protection. And I've learned that in the last year of doing this and speaking out and kind of having the same conversation daily, that just caring for individuals, but really walking my talk, showing up, being present, being at the vaccine clinics, driving through storms, helping colleagues set up clinics, being there, whether physically or on the phone or, just answering questions. Sometimes it's me sitting with people getting a vaccine and holding their hand while the nurse is giving it, talking them down from this fear of, this change you get, and just addressing real things, that it's okay to have beliefs around it, but we'll give you good information. And in the end, it's still up to the individual. And that's where I found that caring comes from. Because if we start to care and we start to demonstrate that healthcare can be a good experience, that you can feel loved and you can have what in Blackfoot we call that kitsigakamen, that you belong somewhere, we then will create stronger communities. And I think that's what that piece has to come forward within this next push around vaccine clinics need to change from being sterile environments where you're just giving injections in the arm, where people are coming in but creating that sense of community, creating that sense of what we all love when we have community celebrations and a powwow. It's a sense of community and connection. We love to come together. And that's one of the things we really promote within what we call the Power of 100 presented VaxFest. And the whole idea was creating this sense of community and recognizing with this initiative that the 18 to 35-year-olds through this demographic were just not showing up for different reasons. And so we had to recognize we need to talk to them. I'm not 35. I wish I was. I'm proud to be my age that I am in my mid 40s, but I can't speak to that generation 20 years ago. 20 years ago, I was in love with Axl Rose, and I don't even know who they're in love with now. So we needed to call in people who know them, and people to call in who do this. And this initiative came forward of really getting to the community, getting youth, getting social influencers, getting the TikTok news people to come and talk and share their experience and share their stories. And we've had very good success in the communities. The people who never ever would have showed up. We've seen vaccinated elders who waited until they felt safe at our clinics to come and get vaccinated. And, if we look at some of the stories just in some communities, with some of the only language speakers of that community felt safe at that time to come. And it's those programs, community-driven programs, again, like Dr. Makoka said, and we've heard it, that was driven by our own people through our own ways. We had medicines, we gave out food, we laughed, we joked. We've had, some of the Indigenous comedians who were there who really led the way, because we all like to laugh, like what Dallas Waska had, and Trevor or Gituki, Prairie Chicken. And it was a real way of us engaging. And that's where I put effort into showing that caring and saying, this is how we care. And this is how Dr. Makokas cares. And this is how the nurses care in the community. And we've seen people come out. And in fact, one of our clinics, we've seen the entire demographic was who we wanted, was youth. We've seen youth hanging out. We've seen them sharing. A Friday night, you normally are not going to see, 17 to 21-year-olds want to come hang around with us. And they did. They stayed right until the end. And these are the things we've seen in community, and that's through caring. And I think that's how we address it. We address it through education, through partnership, and recognizing there is no, and I will be corrected on this, so you can reach out or however you want to do this. There's no federal campaign that's directed towards First Nations. Yes, in Alberta, there's an Alberta Health Services campaign, but around federal campaigns that need to be community driven, that need to be community supported, that need to come into the community to know what we know and the stories we hear, because we're stories of people. That's where we're going to get success. And was that vision behind VaxFest of really recognizing this power of 100 is protecting our people. So 100 years from now, we're still telling stories. We're still having these conversations. And we can only do that if we start to have those, we have that drive within ourselves, but we actually physically do the work that needs to be done.
Thank you very much. I see Shaylee has said for sure. She completely agrees with you. And I want to thank you for sharing that and thanking. I also want to come back to talk to both of you about VaxFest, the two doctors here, about that experience and how that came about and just some different aspects. And I don't know, did Gituki hypnotize anybody? I know he's a hypnotist. So, but I did see that, and it definitely was getting traction, and good job on that. I want to go to our youth panelist, Shaylee. I know you have to go in a few minutes here. She's not going to be with us for the whole hour and a half, but any last thoughts on what we could tell youth, what their hesitancy is, and anything that you would like to share?
Basically, at the end of the day, I feel like a lot of our responsibility for the next generation, the generations that follow, fall on the shoulders. So taking care of, our relatives, regardless if they're elders or babies or, anyone in between, I think that's, that most importance. And we need to keep that in mind when we are making these decisions. And at the end of the day, that's all that we can do is do its best. Anyway, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, and have a good day.
Yes.
Keep the good work. Keep up the good work.
Hey.
Thank you. I will go back to the chief, and Chief Martin, I want to ask, there are still myths out there. It's very strange to know that there are still myths. People are telling people certain stories. I know we had several of them that we highlighted at the beginning, and the two doctors have also said a little bit about the myths that are out there. But what myths do you still see that are happening? And can you tell me a little bit about that from your community perspective? And then also, not only myths, but what is helping people overcome those myths too?
The biggest myth, I guess, on our community was they figured it's going to change your DNA. It's going to alter who you are. It's going to mess up your systems and all that. But the biggest misconception was it's conspiracy theory and all this. They're putting stuff in there and all that. That was some of the biggest myths that we had. But for the most part, a lot of the people still hesitant, I guess. I don't know what would make them hesitant. I had some people that were like I said, some people that were 100% against it, but once they saw that what happened to me, they changed their mind. So that's a good thing on our part. A lot of the misconceptions, I just they stay away from a little bit to way out there. So we just tell people it's safe. You know, I got it. I said, you're going to get a little bit of a say. Like when you do get your initial shot, you're going to feel like kind of feverish for a day or two. That's it. People are saying, well, I'm going to get sick for this. I'm going to end up in the hospital. I heard this. I heard that. I heard that. It's just misinformation on the internet and stuff like that. But for the most part, I said, come to the health center. I sit them down, or one of my staff, or whoever had one of our counselors, or whoever that are all vaccinated. We always sit them down. We tell them our experiences and what happens. And, you know, it's minor. We just said it's just a needle. And you, like you said, you get maybe a feverish for a day. Sometimes you don't even feel it. I know people that got their shots that didn't even have no fever, no nothing. It just went on and they were good. You know, your arm is sore for a day or two, but you know, that's about it. You feel good. And that's once we kind of tell them and they kind of like, that's it. I said, yeah, absolutely. That's it. They're more hesitant and the more or less hesitant they come to the shop, they talk to the nurses and they end up getting their shots. So that's a good thing on that one. That's pretty well I got to say on that one.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Chief. I will go to Dr. Makokis. And again, the question is, there are still myths out there. What are those myths and how can we assist people in overcoming those myths?
There's so many myths, it's hard to keep track of, you know, that there's 5G in your body, that you'll become infertile, your testicles will fall off, they'll shrink. What are some of the, just any number of things that are gonna happen. I can say that like out of all the vaccines that we've done in Treaty 6, 7, and 8, which is, you know, thousands of people, that I've seen one adverse reaction. And, you know, somebody had a little bit of a rash. They had some hives. They had some pre-existing reactions to previous vaccines. So that tells us when we're doing their assessment and checking to see if there's going to be risks of giving them the vaccine, that yes, of course, they may have an allergic reaction, which was not an anaphylactic reaction. It was a localized, you know, reaction that is treatable. And I think those are all reassuring things that, you know, when we look at giving people and vaccines and looking at the adverse events that happen from them, they're very, 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 very low. And that tells us that it's safe, that we've now had the vaccine for a period of over a year, that literally millions of people around the world from all different backgrounds and ethnicities have received the vaccine safely, and that we see the results when people take the vaccine, that they're less likely to end up with serious illness if they do get COVID. Serious illness meaning that they end up in the hospital and intubated and in the ICU. I think people don't understand sometimes how traumatizing it can be to not only oneself, and I think Chief Martin talked about that and alluded to that, to be intubated and to have to be told, you know, as a physician, to have conversations with patients, you know, you're not able to keep up with your breathing. We're going to have to put a tube down your throat and we're going to have to put you to sleep. And we don't know what the chances of your survival is yet, because we know that a certain percentage of people who do get intubated never wake up. And this might be the last time that you're having a conversation with somebody. You know, I think if people put themselves into that position, if this was the last day of my life, what would that look like? What would that be? And I think when we talk about the impact on families, that's what I see as a doctor, is dealing with the families after their loved one has been intubated, and how stressful that is, how traumatizing that is, whether dad's gonna come home, whether mom's gonna come home, whether we're gonna have a Kukumin Muslim again. You know, I miss my Kukumin Muslim, you know, like those are all of the things. And I would say one of the things that for those people that haven't been vaccinated, and I have to tell them that they have COVID, their first immediate response is fear, and their next one is regret. Fear, what's going to happen to me? And regret, I wish I would have got this. I wish I didn't listen to what people were saying. And now I don't know what's going to happen. And in terms of people who do get COVID, especially for those that are unvaccinated, we still don't know the long-term effects of having long COVID. So we know that people who have had COVID, they have what's called brain fog, which can be a certain type of amnesia where they have a hard time remembering words and they can see them. And it's a type of aphasia where it's hard to get the words out. They could see it there, but it's hard to get it out. In the long term, is that going to contribute to developing dementia? Is that going to contribute to developing mild cognitive impairment? What is going to happen in the long term for many of these things, which we don't know yet? So what we do know, and I want to reiterate, is that if you do get vaccinated, the chance of having severe illness requiring hospitalization and intubation in the ICU is much, 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 much lower. And we've seen in Alberta the effect of the healthcare system becoming overwhelmed with people that aren't vaccinated. And my patients, who have been waiting a long time to have a hip replacement, there's elders in the community that need a hip replacement, they need a knee replacement, they might have cancer that needs to be removed, that they're not able to access those services because there's so many people in the hospital with COVID. And when we think about that from a personal perspective, if your relative, if your mom, if your dad, if your son, if your daughter needed a life-saving intervention, but they couldn't have it because somebody, the hospital, there's no room for them in the hospital because people aren't taking a life-saving intervention, how fair is that for that child, for that mom, auntie, uncle, for the next generation to not be able to access care? And I think that's something that as Indigenous people, we've always thought about the well-being of other people. And that's what we're doing when we are taking the vaccine, is ensuring that everybody has access to care if they need it.
Sure, thank you so much. I want to also just reiterate some of the stuff that you said. And one of the greatest things that I think is that came to my mind when you were talking is that there are people, they definitely still have fears. And I think people need to ask themselves, what are those fears? Because almost every fear that they possibly had has been resolved in some way in other areas. So challenging that fear. The other thing too is checking in with those people who have not received the vaccine. I do like Chief Martin said, he actually has members that are talking to the healthcare providers in his community, then they get the vaccine and they're asking their questions. So even though it's 2 years into this, there's people that still have questions. Please feel free to ask healthcare professionals those questions. And they are more than willing to do that. So thank you for that. I had those two thoughts when you were talking, and I'll go to Dr. Potts. And again, the question is, there are still myths that are out there about the vaccine over a year into the vaccine being available. And can you talk about some of the myths that you still hear in your practice, and also what is helping people overcome those myths?
So I want to speak to those who are listening who are not vaccinated. I want to tell you, I hear you. I hear you when you tell me you're worried that you may not be able to have a baby. I worry that if you're pregnant, that'll affect your baby. I hear you when you tell me that you're worried it's going to alter your DNA, that you may look different or grow different, or you may die from it. I hear you when you say you're scared. I hear you when you're worried that it's useless, that it's not going to protect you. I hear you when you tell me that it's easier just to get COVID and get it over with rather than taking something you don't know what's in it. I hear you, and I validate everything you're saying because I had those exact fears. So yes, I am a vaccine champion, and yes, I called for it, but I did wonder, I did research, and there was very little information when I first got it. And I hear these myths, they change every day, from even one where somebody was, showed me like you can have an octopus actually injected in your arm. I have a bottle of vaccine actually sitting about a foot away from me. And so I looked at it. I took what was left, very residual amount, and looked under a microscope and never seen this octopus that I talked about. And I want you to know that I hear you, and I want you to know that it's okay to be scared. And I want you to know that it's okay not to trust this system. But I also want you to know that everything that we're saying is an appeal for a bigger purpose. It's an appeal to protect our community. You may not get sick from it, but my 98-year-old grandmother would have got sick from it had she not been vaccinated. Our language speakers are dying. There's very few of us. We need to protect our babies. The children are getting sick. They used to think initially with COVID, it wasn't affecting children, so people weren't really out, rushing to protect children. That's actually not the case. We're seeing, fatalities in children across the country, and there have been fatalities reported in Alberta with children. So it may not be about you, but remember, everything we do in our lives as Nitsitapi, as Nehio, as Ojibwe people, as Nakota and Lakota and Dakota, Sutena, is about our community. We come from a community that what we did was about each other. It was never about ourselves. We have to remember we were all born into a role long, long ago. We had a role in our community about hunting and feeding and protecting and praying, that everything is about each other. So that is what I want you to recognize, that if you have myths, if you're concerned, I'm personally willing to give you good information, but recognizing that we could sit here and debunk each myth that, we know that mRNA doesn't affect DNA. We know that, there's no baby. There was all these things that it's called anecdotal medicine. So because it happens, cause and correlation in all these terms in medicine is what people hear, people of story. So somebody got pregnant and they had the vaccine and their baby died. And there was this story going around that it was killing babies. And, we've shown that that's not true. So I hear that. I don't turn my ears off and say, oh no, I'm right. I'm the doctor, I know better. But I try to want you to know there's good information. And remember, we need to take care of each other. As Dr. Makoka said, as the chief said, as Loa said, this is about what we do for each other and recognizing we're not invincible. There's no guarantee that we're going to be here tomorrow, but what we do today can actually have a long-term impact, that we will have, those necessary tools to sustain our community. That in Canada, recent statistics this morning, there's 34,000 people that have died unnecessarily, potentially related to COVID. And why I say unnecessarily is because we have tools in our toolbox to protect them. And we have tools in our toolbox to ensure that we have protection against vaccine. When I was first sick with COVID-like illness in March of 2020, after I was in airports with people who came from Italy and China, because I was at the LAX International Airport, I was so sick. I couldn't breathe. I could barely walk 2 feet in my home. And I remember being so afraid, and I remember being so scared and just worrying, what would that do to my grandma? What would do to my matriarch in my community and my family? What would that do if my daughter had no mother, if my husband had no partner, my son had no mom? And I started to think, how do I help? What can I do? And I used my role as a doctor to advocate and speak. So we have to recognize that there's good information which comes forward. There's real things that are happening. And as a physician, I hear what people are saying. But we also have to recognize there's also stories that are true, that are factual, and everything we did as Nititapi and Nehio and as Indigenous people was based in fact. We were scientists. We lived on the land. We knew where to get the best medicine and pick the berries and follow the medicine and follow the water, follow the animals. That's all science. We are a people of science. And what I'm appealing to you today is to listen to the science of your ancestors, who, again, Dr. Makoka said, knew we needed protection. 100+ years ago, they said, no, we need to ensure we live alongside each other. We work with both worlds so we can protect each other. So the myths, I think, are based in this reality of information that's just, it's about anecdotal. Well, I heard this happen to this person. I heard this happen to that person. So I my advice, as a doctor, I never tell people what to do, but my suggestion is get good information, read the information, talk to your healthcare providers, talk to those who've been sick, talk to those who, hear those stories, because there is something you can do to protect yourself, because, we just don't know. Maybe it would be, maybe a week from now, you may be in the hospital, and we don't want that for you, which is why we keep pushing this issue.
Sure, thank you very much. I think every one of our guests, the words that you're saying today is so powerful. And I know it's going to resonate beyond our discussion today, and it will be replayed as well on the radio. So thank you for that. I think more than ever, it's more important. When we started, before we went on air, I was stating it's more important now than ever. And one of the things you had said the other day, Dr. Potts, is that that you have the vaccines you have, and you've had them for over a year, and you're okay. And I think our people, there's such a trust factor, and we can probably all agree that's one of the major things that are happening right now, is that there's that trust factor that's not necessarily there. But when we see our own people, our own leaders, our healthcare professionals, our youth, and so many people have had the vaccine for so long, I think that those myths and that trust can start to open. So I want to say that I did want to come back to your Wsth. If I could ask the two doctors to share. And I do know communities learn from each other. Health, working with the health centers in Alberta, I know, they learn from each other too. And there definitely was an uptake after you guys hosted the Wsth. Can you tell me a little bit about either one of you or both of you, how it came about? What kind of thoughts came behind it, and what kind of positive impact did you see?
Sure. Maybe I can go and then Dr. Potts can jump in and correct me if I screw anything up. So we knew that our young people, much like many of the young people across the country, would maybe be a bit more challenging and resistant to taking the vaccine. We also knew that our young people are very smart, that they are very connected on social media, that they have millions of followers on TikTok and Instagram and all these sorts of things, and make really funny, amazing, entertaining videos, that we needed to look and see how are we going to connect with more than 50% of our population who is under the age of 25, who has the power to transform and change this pandemic for the better within our communities. And we knew that we had to use social media. We knew that we had to meet people where they're at. We knew that we had to have fun, that it couldn't be a boring, sterile, vaccine clinic where doctors and nurses are wearing white lab coats and walking around all professional. We knew that we had to have comedians, and so we put all of these things together. Oh, and prizes. We wanted people to be able to have access to like really cool prizes, and we wanted it to be in an event space that was kind of like a festival. So think something like Coachella, where they can come and listen to music, win prizes, have a good time, and meet people that they looked up to, like some of the Indigenous influencers like we had, like James Jones, the Notorious Cree, Kendra Jesse, Kyron Bureau. And so we did all of those things and held our first one at the, in Treaty 7. And then we moved to Treaty 6 and also in Treaty 8 in many different communities. And so by this point, it had been over, a year and a half that the pandemic had been going on, that it had been about 9 months since vaccines had become available, and that we were looking at targeting the people who were most resistant to getting vaccinated. And so if we looked at it from that perspective, we had a tremendous amount of success where, in the short few hours that we were in a community, whether that's, 6 or 8 hours, that we vaccinated about 10% of the unvaccinated population during one day. And so, the event was very successful. We're looking forward to having more events in the new year, especially now that we have pediatric or children's vaccines available for ages 5 and up, that we want to be ensuring that, our kids, like when they're going to get a vaccine, if I was to take my little 7-year-old nephew to get his vaccine, like is it going to be fun, uncle? And like, yes, it's going to be fun, Atayo. You're going to get a prize. There might be therapy animals. There might be like a card, a festival like atmosphere. And I think that's what parents want to. They want to ensure that if they're bringing their child in, that they're not going to get hurt, that we do techniques, Dr. Potts and myself do different techniques for vaccination so that they don't even feel it. And I think that's the biggest thing, is ensuring the safety, the fun factor, the prize, and that they leave feeling good and empowered that they did a really good thing. And that's really the concept of VaxFest. Dr. Potts can maybe explain a little bit more about the power of 100 and the symbolism that we use behind that, but that's what it's about.
Thank you, Dr. Potts.
Yeah, thank you, James. I get very excited when I speak about it because it's the medicine I love to do, which is in the community. And so the whole concept came around this power of 100, the concept of the goal of vaccinating 100% of our population. So we're here 100 years from now. I always say, we need to live to 100 to ensure our culture and our language are intact. And looking at, what we learn from and where we come from, and especially within my teachings, is we come from the land, or we call Na'a. And we look at our animals and we look at what they show us, and they look at how they protect us and those teachings that came over the years. And so our logo is based on that. Our logo is based on our buffalo, and buffalo being one of the few animals who are on the prairies who will face a storm. They don't retreat, they don't hide, they actually don't cower. They'll walk into a storm. And one of the most important things they do is they really, when faced with a threat, they'll protect their young. So they'll encircle their young, put their young in, in the middle of their herd, and then face that threat outward. And that's what we realize we need to do collectively as a population, as a community, as physicians, as nurses, as leaders, is we need to protect those who can't protect themselves. And that's youth, that's people who are not sure about vaccinating, people who can't get the vaccine, about our elders, our language, our ceremonies, that we have an obligation to meet that objective of that power of 100, being here, being intact 100 years from now. And through that, was VaxFest is, one initiative that really is born out of that it's that, not just, it's walking the talk. It's not just saying in theory, it's actually doing it and going out and, Dr. McCocus and the team were in the north, battling storms and driving in whiteouts and really realizing the reality of living in rural communities and recognizing, all the struggles we had in getting supplies and medicine and vaccinations. And, but that difference you make when the elders show up, the difference you make when for the first time in some of the communities, they had gatherings, they had a round dance. And in one of the northern communities, they sang together for it was over 12 months that they were able to sing those songs and feel that connectiveness. And that's that power of 100. So the goal is really to create that, is to bring that medicine, that we are the medicine, as Indigenous people, we're the medicine, and that's where the answer lies. And that's what this came from. And it's, again, speaking to the youth, the initiative with VaxFest was for that 18 to 35, because they're smart. They're way smarter than I am, than I ever was at that age or ever will be. And I think it's about being creative and listening. And again, this is listening. I always say, I hear you, and I want to ensure that I'm responding to what you're saying. And so they needed it in a different way. They needed different information. They needed, people to talk with them who they're listening to. And they also needed us to show up as doctors, not just to say, oh, we're doing this, we're going to designate it to a nurse. Because we showed up, Dr. McCocus went to the northern communities. I wasn't able to go just due to weather. But we're there walking through the mud and driving through the roads and showing up. And that's what people, come back to what I said before. When you care about people, they care about themselves and they care about their community. And that's where that was driven from.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to give props to the both of you and to the entire team. And I could also probably ask, there was no hesitancy from any of the influencers or performers. Was there any hesitancy?
Yeah, we actually gave James Jones and Kendra Jesse their first dose at the Sutina VaxFest that we had. They had actually just recovered from COVID. They had a lot of the same concerns that we talked about today. After having COVID, they knew that, and actually Kendra's mom, was vaccinated and she sailed right through it. And Kendra, who's like, an N7 Nike fitness model, is always on these campaigns on social media about fitness, they got really debilitated with COVID, and they said, wow, like if my mom, barely had any side effects of the same sickness that we had, and they're in their 20s and really healthy, then we should probably get it too. So, we gave them their vaccine. They felt really good about it. But the rest of the influencers already had their vaccine. And so that was a really powerful thing for people to see that, there's these young people that many people from around the world look up to, and they had the same fears and concerns. But in the end, they ended up getting the vaccine by Dr. Potts and I, which is actually a really cool thing to be able to do.
That's good. Thank you so much again for all that you're doing. We're going to be wrapping up here in 5 minutes. So I would like to give each of our guests about a minute and a half just to reiterate your message that you had today. And thank you all again for coming. And I will start with Chief Roger Martin from Cold Lake First Nation.
I'd just like to say thank you for having me on this. If my story could help somebody out there listening, I'll be really happy, very glad. I just don't want people to go through what I went through. It's not a very good thing. I'm lucky I survived. I'm here. I like to share my story. And like I said, prevention, get out there, get your shots. Thank you. Masicho. Have a good day.
Thank you, Masicho. I will go to Dr. Potts.
Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate you listening, and I just want to send a message to you that I appeal to you as a mom, as a community member, as a physician, as a budding ceremonialist, as I learn my culture, that I'm asking you to do your part. I'm asking you to do your part in protecting your communities, your children, and our elders. We need to protect them going forward. We need to ensure that they're here, that we need to ensure they're taken care of. Vaccines are one part of it, but also taking care of yourself, reaching out for healthcare, reaching out for those who are struggling with mental health, and many other things that are compounded on top of just vaccines. I know vaccines are safe. I'm 1 year today, double vaxxed. I am triple vaxxed and will get a 4th vaccine if needed. And had very, little side effects other than a sore arm. Sore arm is normal. They're going through a muscle. They're making a hole in your skin. That all those things are part of the process. And ask questions. I'm here. I'm always open to reaching out to those who need more information and recognizing we're in this together. And if we don't do it, no one else will. So continue to protect yourselves in any way that you can. And I thank you for giving me this opportunity and this platform to share my story and my knowledge that I've learned over the years from our elders and community and colleagues.
Thank you very much, Dr. Makokis.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on today, and for all the listeners who have been listening so diligently along. When I went to medical school and university, it was really from the encouragement of my elders in the community. And they would always, encourage me like, Nosim, Agamemuk, like keep going, my grandchild, and then come back and help our people. And so it was always with that mindset that I remembered when I was in school why I was doing that, because both Dr. Potts and I were in university for 13 years or so. And, we're not getting paid to do this. We don't get paid to, for every vaccine that we give. We really do it for the love that we have for our people, and to ensure that our communities are strong, that there's as many of us left as possible, at the end of this. And that's why we volunteer our time and do the work that we do. And that we can use both medicines. We can use our own medicines, we can use Western medicines, and that both of them are good. It doesn't make us any less if we use Western medicine. In fact, and I always go back to this, that when our elders agreed to treaty in 1876 and had the adhesion to Treaty 6 with the medicine chest clause, that this is exactly what it was put in place for. So by taking the medicine, by taking the vaccine, we're realizing the vision that those elders had for us so many years ago. If anyone has questions, like please reach out to us. Booster. I'll get my one after that if needed. And thank you so much.
Thank you, thank you, thank you very much. I cannot express the thanks that I have for all of our guests, the background work that we have done, the many COVID-19 vaccine town halls that we've done over this year. More than ever, I've said a couple of times, it's more important now than ever. I'm very thankful for our voices today. Today we had Chief Roger Martin from Cold Lake First Nation, Dr. Lana Potts from Piikani First Nation, Dr. James Makokis from Satellite Cree Nation, and we had a youth panelist, Shaylee Peacock from Enoch Cree Nation. I want to thank our steering committee from Treaty 6, 7, and 8 health centers. I also want to thank the Windspeaker Media and the First Nations Inuit Health Branch. Thank you very much, and get a matsin. Are we off the air?